Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I am speaking with Erec Smith. Eric is a professor of rhetoric at York College in Pennsylvania, and he's got a book out, Critique of Anti-Racism and Rhetoric and Composition. And he's also involved with Free Black Thought. You can check out their website or their account on Twitter. Hey Eric, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I've been following you for a little bit, and I saw your two interviews with Benjamin Boyce. Now,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to read your book. I spent far too much time reading the CRT and the anti-racism stuff. I haven't got around to much of the other side of it. Um, but yeah, I
Yes.
wanted to maybe talk to you about that and like talk to you about uh, like how you like why you thought you needed to do that and like where it came from, and also maybe some of the stuff Free Black Thought is doing. If we can get to that.
Okay. Well, how I got into this, it's it was always building, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was building since I was a kid, really, and I realized at a young age that I kind of didn't belong anywhere, right? I was raised initially first 13, 14 years of my life in a predominantly white environment. And that had its problems, as you can imagine. So when I graduated eighth grade and had the chance to go to a high school that was much more diverse, where other Black people were, I was giddy with anticipation. I couldn't wait. I was finally going to be with my people and have to deal with this crap. Well, I got there, and I was rejected by them because I was apparently too white, right? In a lot of ways, they were crueler. So that said to me, okay, this whole race thing is a load of crap. Why is this the way it is? So that planted the seed for me to dive into these things. Um, that being said, I realized later on, like after I got my PhD and things like that, that I didn't want to do African American studies specifically. I mean, I never really wanted to do it specifically. I just wanted to, I'm a rhetorical theorist. I like rhetoric. I don't really abide by a particular culture's rhetoric, not initially anyway. So I kind of stepped away from it, but it pulled me back in, to quote Michael Corleone, um, because in 2019 there was a keynote address at a flagship conference in my field, the Conference of College Composition and Communication. This keynote address basically said that not only was expecting students of color to write in a dialect deemed standard, not only was that racist, but it was also cruel and did them harm. Um, Lines like, Black students are quote unquote suffocated by whiteness came out in that talk. Now, I admire the person who gave the talk. I'm not coming down on him personally, although people think I am for some odd reason. Um, but I had an issue with his conclusions. So I made that known on a listserv for rhetoric scholars, and it did not go well. It went so badly that I was reminded of Harold Garfinkel's definition of a status degradation ceremony. Um, and what that is, I mean, I'll put it this way. Several years ago, we had people got tarred and feathered. They're put in pillories or something like that. Now we have social media mobbing, right? We have cancellation and things like that. But it's a version of that, and that was happening to me because I dared say, "Is this the best way to go?" Right? I dared question that, and the attacks, the multiracial attacks, from Black people, white people, Latinx, that made me realize what was going on, and it made me pivot as a scholar a little bit towards, um, anti-racism and wokeness. Right? I won't even say CRT, because there are a lot of good things in CRT. There are some things that definitely fuel the contemporary fire of wokeness in CRT. But there are also some pretty, innocuous, if not, brilliant concepts that have been twisted, and we can talk about that a little bit later on. But I decided to start studying that, and I decided to revamp a book I was already working on that had to do with dialect and writing and things like that to a degree, but not. It wasn't an all-out critique of contemporary anti-racism in the field. It became that. So I pivoted in the middle of writing that book. I'm glad the publisher was flexible about that, but I wouldn't recommend totally changing the direction of a book with 3 months go 3 months deadline. I would not recommend that. Um, it is psychologically taxing. It is emotionally taxing. Relationships failed because of it. But I did get the book out, and that is a critique of anti-racism and rhetoric and composition, the semblance of empowerment. So that's why I'm here.
Hey, cool, great. A couple of things are just okay. Rhetoric. Now, a lot of time when it's used in common parlance, it's almost like used in derision. Oh, that's just a bunch of rhetoric and this that.
Right.
So, what exactly is it?
The simplest definition
Mm.
comes from Aristotle, and that is, rhetoric is the ability in any given situation to discern the available means of persuasion. What that means is that in one situation, there are certain metaphors and references that you can use to be as persuasive as possible. And in other situations, there are different ones. You can't use the same ones. You may actually alienate your audience if you use the same ones. So one size does not fit all when it comes to persuasion. So noticing that and noticing some of the tactics of language that you can use to identify with your audience and be as persuasive as possible. Um, Rhetoric is a study of that, right? It's used in derogatory terms, mainly because of Plato. Um, he wrote several dialogues starring the great Socrates. Two of them that are most relevant to rhetoric are the Gorgias and the Phaedrus. And in the Gorgias, rhetoric is seen as a tool for, dastardly men to trick people and gain power in, ignoble ways, right? And Socrates was complaining and warning about that. Plato would, change his tune a little bit later on in his career with the Phaedrus, in which he said, we need to be dedicated to the truth, but we also need to realize that different people are ready to handle some things and not others. We have to meet people where they are, right? And in doing that, we have to be rhetorical, right? Um, I'm paraphrasing here, but Plato had Socrates say we have to look into the soul of the person we're talking to, the people we're talking to, in order to figure out how to best convey the truth to them. So the derogatory take on rhetoric originates with Plato's Gorgias, but that was he was giving it a bad rap, in my opinion.
I just like I said because you hear it a lot, and I mean I use it, and I'm pretty sure I'm using it wrongly whenever I do. So I just wanted to get that cleared up. But when you mentioned whiteness, and this was something because it came up again yesterday with the shooter in Boulder, and I mean something about it struck me yesterday. Now, if I understand this correctly, coming from like the Kennedy camp, let's just say, uh, all the racial categories, and I'm not denying this, like it was made up by white men and it was used to subjugate people and it was excuse so why they can get away with it as justification, all that. Like I'm not, but then okay, this is obviously predates Kennedy, but then when they say, okay, well, these were created by white people and this is the society they created, so we're going to embrace that identity. Fine, embrace it, do whatever. I think it would be better just to say, forget it, we don't want it. But whatever. That's but now I'm seeing where they say, okay, well, especially like after the George Floyd killing, you had a lot of this stuff coming out where objectivity is whiteness and things like that. And then yesterday, first when you hear about the shooting in Boulder, or you see the picture of the guy being taken away. Yes, he looks visibly white. And it's like, oh, another white man being led away, not being killed by the police. And then yesterday there was a whole debate of whether or not Syrians are white. Now, if these categories were created by white people and used to subjugate everyone else, and these were, it's a form of colonialization, you're putting these identities on people, all this, aren't the anti-racists now doing the same thing by saying, okay, well, Syrians are white, if like that the term politically black, um, you know, just horrible things like Asians are white adjacent, or they've taken on whiteness, arguing whether Jews are white. And then you had this thing of Jews of color. But if Syrians are white, then are Jews from the Levant white, or are they Jews of color? Like how does that work? Like, I mean, aren't they just exactly doing the same thing? They're taking that idea of whiteness and they're putting it on people.
Yeah, they are doing the same thing. You were right to be confused, because they're being confusing. And the main reason that I can discern, and I don't think I'm the only one discerning it in this way, is that it's all about power, and it's all about oppressor and oppressed in a particular context, right? So Asians are white adjacent when it suits anti-racist, and they're people of color when it suits anti-racist. The point is to always have the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy in any kind of situation, right? So, and you manipulate the facts or the empirical material, right, for those purposes. When people say stuff like politically black or multiracially white, right, it's to combat a particular situation. Say a black person is embracing things that are considered white, like objectivity and reason and delayed gratification and punctuality and things like that, and they're defending those things. And then the anti-racist can't say, "Oh, well, you're black and you're saying that, so I must be wrong." They have to spin it somehow, and they spin it with this idea of white adjacency, multiracial whiteness, things like that. One can see from all this that obviously whiteness is considered an ideology, right? That overlaps substantially with other ideologies that serve as the foundation of Western civilization, and especially the United States. That foundation can be called classical liberalism, right? Um, a respect for the primacy of reason, right? Objectivity, individuality, free speech, freedom and equality, the right to not be judged as a member of a group, but as an individual. All these things are kind of under attack by anti-racists, the same way Marxists would attack such ideas, right? So that's why a lot of people see this as an offshoot of cultural Marxism. But all this comes down to oppressor and oppressed, and critiquing classical liberalism. And critical race theory is not silent about its distrust of liberalism, right? It's one of the foundations of critical race theory. So if you take that into consideration, then whenever a person of color is exemplifying or championing anything remotely classically liberal, that person has to be shunned.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, that's again, you mentioned the neo-Marxism stuff, but okay, they're all just dogmas. But I still think this has more of a religious aspect to it than it does like Marxism, like the shunning thing. Okay, the Amish shun you. I mean, it's if you take the Abrahamic faiths, it started with Judaism. He that leads you to God, follow gods other than the gods of your fathers, even if he's your brother, kill him. Right, and Muslims aren't exactly happy with apostates either. So it's you get that, like they're your oh, you're supposed to be on my side, but you're not. I get that from it, like the religious aspect. But just because you'd mentioned it and you talked about it earlier, like about CRT. Now, I like I said, I started reading a lot of this stuff, and it basically started with Bell's paper. Well, I started with white fragility. Then I was like, this makes no sense. Where does it come from? And then I went back. So I got this book that said the 25 papers that launched the movement, right? And the first paper in it was Bell's paper from 75, Serving Two Masters.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Now, that back then, was that still critical legal scholarship, or like, because I know like the term critical race theory didn't come around until about the late 80s, early 90s,
Yeah.
something like that, right? So that's,
Critical legal studies, yes.
yeah.
At that time.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, when I'm reading some of Bell's stuff, like I disagree with Bell on quite a lot. I just don't, but it's well reasoned and it's well argumented.
Mm-hmm.
I could completely disagree with what he says, but like you said, he brings up some really good points, and it just twists them and goes way off the deep end. And I mean, if we could stick with those little kernels, like one I keep bringing up from that paper was when he talked about the desegregation of schools. And
Yeah.
he said education should have been desegregated, not schools. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, don't bus kids for an hour or 2 hours. Fix the goddamn school they're in, that they're in.
Right.
Busing maybe is a short-term, stopgap or something. But yeah, so I'm trying to see where that just like where it went from the legal scholarship to critical race theory.
Well, if you want a date or as close enough to
Yeah.
a specific date as possible, 1989, 1990,
Yeah.
1991. That's when Kimberly Crenshaw, one of Bell's students,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken, got into the game and started adding terms to Bell's take on critical legal studies and things like that. The term she's most famous for is intersectionality, and what that means is that and it's a reasonable concept, right? A person isn't just one thing; it's just one demographic. That person is an intersection of various demographics, and in the court of law, we would do well to see somebody as an intersection of things and not just one thing, right? Um, you know, um, if there's a case about spousal abuse or something like that, that person isn't just a battered woman; she's a battered Black woman of a certain class, and those things come into play as well, right? A Black man who does the same crime as a Black woman has different reasons, different motivations. It's a different situation because he's a Black man and not a Black woman. So this idea of intersectionality was there just to have a more specific analysis of people. That makes sense to me. I think it's common sense, but obviously for reasons we can talk about later on, it's been twisted into something else. Around that time, CRT starts to emerge as its own thing, and other people get into it as well. Richard Delgado, Mari Matsuda. These are some of the main names I know. Gene Stefancic, and obviously Derek Bell is still there and maintains his status as the forefather, I guess, of critical race theory. That's when it really starts to take off in academia anyway. And it moves beyond legal studies, right? It gets into other aspects of the humanity as well. Yes, in the 70s, it was still an offshoot of critical legal studies. Late 80s, early 90s, it became its own thing, critical race theory, and it just grew or morphed or devolved into what it seems to be today.
Okay, when you mentioned Bell, because sorry, not Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, I've seen a lot of her talks. The only things I've really read by her, aside from opinion pieces in journals and things, were her paper from 1989, the name escapes me, and then Mapping the Margins in 91.
Margins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I like the idea of intersectionality. That makes sense, and it's a useful tool. It's helpful for analysis, or like you said, in legal cases, this and that. But I mean, like after she finished mapping the margins near the end of it, when she like, you have to have an identity based politics and this and that, like, get rid of the liberal ethic. Uh, I mean, she didn't really map them. She gerrymandered them because no, but you had weird things happening after that. I mean, like you had it in Canada, um, and then you've had this in the UK as well, where I think one of the like I don't want to get into the grooming gangs in the UK, but one of the most egregious cases I read about was in Germany. It was a Moroccan woman who was seeking a divorce from her husband, and he was also Moroccan. They were both Muslim, and he was beating her. And the judge said, well, that's just part of your culture. So they're looking at like a weird intersection. Okay, that's Muslim, that's your culture, that's what you do. We have to be culturally sensitive. And this was in 2014 or 15.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, so like it had some really bad effects because there's a good friend of mine, Yasmin Mohammed, and in her memoir that came out last year, she went to the police. Like a teacher from her high school took her to Child Protective Services, and because her parents were brown and she was brown, well, sorry, that's just a cultural thing that they're beating you.
Wow.
So I mean, it's like things like that have happened. Where they're so that intersectionality, like, yeah, it's a very useful tool. Like that one case, I think she can't remember if it was Ford or GM, the car dealers. The car, like they had black men working in the warehouse, they had white women working out front, but they had no black women. And like okay, that's really okay. It's call it bias, call it whatever. Maybe it was intentional, but it was a good way to look at that. But what's happening with the court cases and what's happening with, oh, you're from another country, so we have to treat you differently. It's completely morphed. It just went off the rails.
Yeah. And that's an aspect of it that I guess I don't talk about enough. The fact that people are taking intersectionality and using it in ways that are detrimental to the people it's trying to help. Um, and you make good points. When I look at the downside of intersectionality, I look at it from the woke perspective. And intersectionality goes from a mode of analysis to an ethos, right? It becomes a creator of credibility. The more oppressed intersections you have, the more respect you get in certain circles. The more you're allowed to speak, the more your opinion and lived experience matters. Forget about subjectivity. If you have enough oppressed intersections, your word is objective. Um, and if you have oppressor intersections, white, male, um, upper middle class, things like that, you are considered less credible, right? You're looked at with suspicion. There are tenets of racism derived from the work of people like um, D'Angelo that say that anything that makes white people comfortable needs to be suspect. We need to look at it, and see where the racism is happening. Another tenet, probably the most famous one, as far as my research has shown me, is the question: it's not whether racism happened or not, it's how it manifested in that situation. So if somebody interprets something as racist, you're not allowed to ask why. It's definitely racist. We just have to figure out how it manifested in this particular situation, which is another twisted version of a concept in critical race theory. Mari Matsuda, also talking about intersectionality and things like that, she said, when we see an issue that looks like sexism, try to figure out where the racism is too, right? When you see something that looks racist, try to figure out where the sexism is, or any other kind of form of oppression, because intersectionality is a thing. It didn't say definitely find it, right? It said look for it. It might be there. That's been twisted into it's there, right? It's there because a person with the right intersections is saying it's there, so it can't be questioned. that's why I separate CRT from what many people call wokeness. There's substantial overlap, yes, but there are also some things that don't necessarily come out of CRT directly. I
Okay.
feel like when I answer these questions, I start rambling. So if I'm,
No, no, that's fine. Go ahead, please.
I'm
Yeah. Okay. I just want to because you started talking about your book. I want to try to kind of tie this in with your book because some of these things you mentioned, like objectivity and punctuality and things like that. But another one I saw was the respect of the written word or love of the written word.
yeah,
Um, Now, in your book, like critique of anti-racism and rhetoric and composition. I mean, and I think you mentioned you swung halfway through it or near the end of it, but why are they trying to forget about the like how it's ahistoric anyways, all these things you're talking about, because like I said, I'm pretty sure the Egyptians were objective when they were building the pyramids. They needed some of that, you know, you know but like, why are they purposely trying to deny the tools that would help you know underprivileged communities like black neighborhoods, brown neighborhoods, like white neighborhoods in Appalachia? Like, these people need these things, you know
yeah.
like,
Well, I mean, I have my speculations. One is that um, their ideas would fall apart under the least bit of scrutiny. So if we can demonize reason and rationality, we can protect ourselves from that, right? But there's also this idea that if something comes out of Eurocentric or Anglocentric origins, then it's suspect, right? Um, there are people who, refuse to dialogue with people who disagree with them, especially um, people who enjoy hegemonic status who disagree with them, typically white males. They see that as an inherent trick, right? You're going to use reason and rationality to maintain the status quo. You're not going to try to understand me. You're not going to try to collaborate with me to arrive at a truth. You're doing this to manipulate me into giving up my stance and maintaining the status quo. Reason, dialogue, those things are Trojan horses for white supremacy, right? Um, I often bring up Wayne Booth, who was a prominent rhetorician, and in a book he wrote called "The Rhetoric of Rhetoric," he coined this term, listening rhetoric. And basically, what that is doing your best to empathize with the other person, to put yourself in his or her shoes, to try to understand why that person thinks what that person thinks, and that person does the same to you. There's a distrust of that in the woke circles, and Booth kind of predicted that. He said there are variations of listening rhetoric, and one of the variations was, somebody listening just to find the weaknesses in your argument so that he can manipulate them. Right? He's not really trying to understand. He's trying to find where he can, find the weaknesses in your armor. And that version of listening rhetoric is what the woke see as always happening from hegemonic sources, white males or white adjacent people, and that's the case. So reason, the scientific method, individuality, all these things are insidious and tacit tools of whiteness and can't be trusted.
yeah, but okay, they're not though. I mean, like,
Yeah, I know.
okay, no, I keep pointing this one thing out because I mean, I read this last year. Someone had sent it to me, and I want to read this guy's writings. I really do. And it was an Ethiopian man named Jacob who fell, like, said something against Christianity or Catholicism. The king had just converted, and he had to run away. And this was something like 100 years before Hume and Locke and Kant. So he went and hid in a cave in Ethiopia. He'd learned a local form of rhetoric, and he'd been trained by Jesuits. And they found his writings, and his writings were very similar to those of Hume and Locke and Kant. but they were 100 years before. I'd love to read this guy's writings. I'd love to see what he has to say. I mean, all I know is that he existed and that these writings are out there, but just that in itself, I mean, India has a Stoic tradition going back about 2,000 years, and that was with trade from the Greeks. And there was a lot of mixing back and forth, things like that. I mean, so like, how do they account for that? They just use cultural appropriation? Oh, the whites took it and like.
Well, they don't really address that I've seen. Anyway, there are East Asian philosophies that align, nicely with classical liberal values. Well, I mean, you can go all over the place. The fact that Europeans felt this way as they were colonizing is the most salient point for them, right? And as long as that's the case, as long as it's associated with the colonizer, it's suspect. This is all about tearing down, any kind of Eurocentric power, right? It's about tearing that down. And when that's all you want is to tear things down. It's less about, reason and rationality and making sense, and more about doing whatever you can in a particular situation to decenter whiteness and weaken it to the best of your ability.
You want to tear down the white Western ways of thinking because white Western people imposed this on everyone else, but they didn't. I mean, it's okay. I look at this at the harm that it's going to do to developing nations and like what it's doing to places like the Middle East. I mean, even before you had Edward Said's post-colonialism, you had stuff. You had Hassan al-Banna starting with Muslim Brotherhood and Said Qutb putting identity politics along to it, like Pan-Arabism and all that. But the post-colonialism, even now, it's when you mention Enlightenment values or you mention these things, they're looked upon like secularism has a really bad connotation in the Middle East because it was associated with, and rightfully so, installed dictators. Oh, they're secular, whatever, right? But so it has a very bad connotation,
right?
But the post-colonialism actually stops them from even thinking about things like this. I have a friend of mine. He started this thing called Ideas Beyond Borders, where they translate books on science and philosophy, and they did some kids' books. They translate them into Arabic, Farsi, and Kurdish, and they make them available for free in the Middle East. They're available online. And I mean, when they put out the first call, I think Faisal told me in the first day they had 15,000 people volunteer to translate. And this is in places like Iraq, where reading these books is illegal. It's some of these places, it's death for these kids. And they're all young. They're all like in their early 20s. They're young people doing this. And they're looking for this stuff. But you have the theocrats, you have people in politics, whatever. Oh, this is a white Western way of doing it. They're pushing it as white Western. These guys doing the same thing. I mean, you're harming them. I mean, another thing I look at is Africa. So aside from North Africa, like a map that I'd seen with the COVID vaccine, all of sub-Saharan Africa we're taking the Chinese vaccine. China is spending so much money down there. 2016, University of Cape Town had a conference that said science must fall.
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, okay. So last year they put out a thing about black physics in South Africa. You want to go get black teachers, you want to get Neil deGrasse Tyson to teach an astrophysics course, go ahead. More power to you. But there's no such thing as black physics. China is buying them out wholesale and giving them roads and whatever. We're sending over a toxic ideology that it's not helping them. You were on with Benjamin Boyce. You just had someone on recently. Sorry, I'll shut up after this. She was an Indian woman, and she was talking about, she just had a documentary out called Dysphoria, or Dysphoric. And she's talking about how the gender theory and queer theory and what it's doing with trans rights, how that's really harming women in India.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, we're not even at the point where we can have a safe space and you're putting all this where you're getting rid of gender. We can't even fight for our gender rights anymore. So I mean, like, we're exporting this. Like, the West is exporting this, and you have places like China buying things up, and the kids in the Middle East, there's a hunger for this. I mean, when Dawkins' book, was it? I forget his book, the one about religion.
I don't.
Yeah, whatever. I can't remember it. But anyways, someone illegally put it up in the Middle East. He said it was okay to go. It got downloaded, I think, 2 million times in the first day, or something silly like that. There is a hunger for this, but we're trying to get rid of it, and
Yeah.
we're hurting people. We're actually hurting people.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I was talking to somebody yesterday, and he was like, "Is this some kind of conspiracy to, to weaken people so that they're easier to control? They have, knowledge is power, so take away knowledge, right? Demonize knowledge, right? Demonize epistemology methodologies, right? That can help people seek truth, or at least the most pragmatic truth for a particular situation." Right. If you can do that, then you can weaken people and control them easier. And I was like, something, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I've totally thought that. and it's the kind of thing I don't say out loud very much because, it is speculation. But if you look at things and you take what contemporary anti-racism is doing to its logical conclusion, it's going to hurt more than it's going to help. Right, as you just pointed out. So I don't know why this is happening, why this is working. I don't.
I have some speculations, but okay. Instead of just being a little negative, like I said, you were involved with Free Black Thought, and I want to get in a little of that. But I mean, just because she's been on Twitter lately a lot. This young kid, I think he's like 21, and he said, "I've just started up a school." Like, there's someone trying to do something.
Yeah.
I might not go. Who knows what's going to come of it? But so, like, being involved with Free Black Thought, like, is that what you're kind of looking for? Or is it just opening up to, there's not one Black Thought, there's everything? Or are you just trying to, like, find examples of people doing, good initiatives like that? Like, I'm trying to wonder what the whole idea behind Free Black Thought was.
The answer is yes to both of those.
Okay.
But mostly we want to let people know that there's stuff out there from Black people that does not align with Kendi and D'Angelo and Ta-Nehisi Coates and various people in my field who say things like there's a Black way of doing things and a white way of doing things, right? I've been accused of abiding by white ways of knowing. Therefore, I'm not a real Black person, right? White ways of knowing means that there's a Black way of knowing. And when I ask, well, what's the Black way? They can never answer my question, right? There's a term in my field called whiteley. It's a rhetoric in which people see themselves as virtuous, as good, and things like that. And they're arrogant about it to the point where, they can do no wrong and things like that. And I won't I have a part about this in the book that I won't get into right now. But I thought two things. One, I know a lot of Black people like that, like a lot, and they're not multiracially white. They're the kind of people that they would say, okay, that's a real Black person. They would say that. Secondly, I asked, okay, well, that's whiteley. Can you tell me what Blackly is? They can never answer that question. Never. So, we're trying to let people know that there are other viewpoints out there. And those viewpoints may not agree with each other. The point is, there are other viewpoints out there. And we're trying to inform people of that.
Yeah, okay, but that's, again, like, in 2021 now, I guess, that we have to say that, Black people in America have multiple viewpoints, or even to say that white people in America have multiple viewpoints, because now it's, it's all whiteness or white ways of knowing. Like, it's okay, I mean, we went backwards. The way I
Okay.
looked at the timeline of this, I keep thinking to myself, it's around the mid to late '90s. Where from academia and policy, the shift went from, you know, a liberal ethic to identity based politics.
Hmm.
And that's where I see that shift happening. And that's, we need to get back to that, or try to get back to that ethic, because I'm sorry, like I keep saying it, you're a majority white country and you want to get people to focus on their racial identity and, make an identity based on that, make politics based on that. And you're scratching your head why something like Charlottesville happens. Like, I'm sorry, but it's going to keep happening.
Right. Right.
It's a powder keg.
Uh, Definitely. Uh, I feel your pain, my friend. I'm with you. I mean, it's odd we have to talk about these things in 2021, but we have to talk about these things in 2021. Um, the George Floyd. I mean, this has been happening for years. One of the biggest catalysts of it is the election of Donald Trump, and then you have George Floyd's killing, which really opened the floodgates. But these things were starting to happen before that. I mean, they're starting to happen decades ago, really. But it started to really pick up steam even before Donald Trump. It started to pick up steam during Obama,
Yeah.
right? And that's interesting, right? And I mean, we can have some speculations about that. I have mine. So that's why in the book I talk about a primacy of identity and prefiguration, all these things that um, I use to label a semblance of empowerment and not real empowerment. That predates critical race theory, right? That's an antecedent to the consequence of critical race theory. So, right, and I mean, this is my speculation regarding where this is coming from and why it's so strong, exacerbated by Trump
Yeah.
and things being called on tape, right, and ultimately George Floyd and Breonna Taylor.
I mean, when I look at the timeline of this again, I'm going to look at the media side of it. It was 9/11. After 9/11, you had, okay, it was patriotic. Bill Maher got his show canceled because he was unpatriotic. I can remember all that, which is kind of silly. But patriotism was good for a little bit. But let's say within 6 months to a year after 9/11, patriotism was started to be made racist. Oh, America's racist because of patriotism. Like you had the Islamophobia thing happening. And okay, the Tea Party didn't help at all.
Right, right. There are other things out there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's plenty of crap. Like I'm not trying to just take away from that. Okay. Then when Obama gets in, that's like I think it was Zach Goldberg who did that study. Like you start seeing the racism talk rise in his
right.
first term. By the time his second term comes along, going to Trump, it just zooms up.
Hmm.
Now it's you know, there's racism out there. I'm not, like you don't have to. Shouldn't even have to say like I'm not denying it or anything like that. But it's putting that focus on it and getting everyone to look at it. I mean, and the silly articles too, like running is racist and is bicycling racist, is whatever. And then the silly articles that were really bad. This one was in 2019. It was two South Asian guys or teens beat up four black teens, and it was like it was two boys and four girls, and one of the boys pissed on the girls, and this happened at I don't know if it was a New Jersey high school or they were on a field trip to New York City or something. Op-ed piece in the New York Times was, "Oh, this is whiteness. They've taken on whiteness." I'm like, okay, just take that away for a second. But you're not letting the kids deal with what they did. Like they have to be kind of held accountable. They have to be kind of. They're not going to learn from what they did. They're not going to learn why they did it wrong. Again, you're giving them that excuse. You're giving them that crutch. Like whiteness made me do it. Like the devil made me do it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, like that's kind of what I see as a timeline of how this came out in the press. But yeah, I don't know. Like again, I don't want to like I don't want to lose the academy, but the way I'm looking at it right now, I mean, it needs to change something fierce. It's so siloed off. The physics departments are going to listen to gender scholars because they're misogynistic. They have to have more women. They're going to listen to race scholars, but there's no. If a physicist try to question the methodology or what was going on, I mean, would he still have a job?
Probably not these days. And everything is attributed to race and racism and things like that. There's oh man, I forget what European country did a study about the gender disparity in the sciences, and they concluded that it's not that women are being barred from the sciences; they want to do other things.
That was the Scandinavian countries. They've had those a couple times. I just spoke with she's a friend of mine. She was born in Saudi, raised in Saudi, in a strict Muslim household. She's now in the States. She's a chemical engineer, and she talked about this. So in the Middle East or in very oppressive countries like that, and Saudi is a very misogynistic country. Women don't have a lot of options. So you have again, you see it from the anti-racists. Oh, look at Saudi Arabia. They've got 50% of the women going to STEM. It's so advanced. It's so progressive. It's like, no, they have no other choice. Like for her, it was do well in school, get accepted to a college in the United States, and get my freedom. That was for her. It was an escape.
Mm-hmm.
But the more free and open a society is, people are allowed to choose what they want to do. They don't need to, especially for women, like, it's all about choice, isn't it? And if they want to stay home, be a mother and a homemaker, go ahead. If they want to be a teacher, they want to be whatever. But it's now it's like, okay, well, it sounds, in some ways like China or Soviet Union. Well, this person's good at math, so send them into math.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's getting ridiculous. Look, I don't want to keep you too much longer because I know you got to teach. But if you've got any last thoughts on how to, push back against this, or like any kind of messages of, hope.
Hope no. Well, I mean, we have to start speaking up more. People who can speak up. People who don't have precarious job situations, right? Say, I don't know, professors of color with tenure. They have to start speaking up more and trying to get the word out there to the best of their ability and as often as possible. So, I mean, that's what we have to do. So if there's anything remotely close to hope that I have, is that, that starts to happen more.
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, just get away from this. Like, okay, this is black thought or this is white thought. Just, I agree with like the Thomas Chatterton Williams and the Camille Foster thing. Like, let's just stop talking about race.
Yeah.
There's practical solutions, and let's get to those, and let's leave the racecraft out of it for now. Anyways, thanks a lot for coming on and talking to me. It was great, and yeah, thank everyone for listening.
Thank you.